All right, let's dive in. Today we're looking at irrational behavior. All those weird things we do, even when we think we're being totally logical. You sent me some excerpts from Sway, The Irresistible Pull of Irrational Behavior, this book by Ori and Rom Brafman.
Oh, yeah, Sway. It's a good one. Really makes you think.
For sure. So we'll be looking at how things like loss aversion, commitment, those kinds of things can really mess with our choices. But we're not just talking theory here. We're going for real world stuff, how this actually plays out in our lives.
Absolutely. I think that's what makes Sway so interesting. It uses these wild, real-life stories to show how these psychological forces are actually working. Like, did you read about the Tenerife airport disaster?
Yeah, that one was pretty crazy. It really shows how even like the best of the best can get tripped up by irrationality. Okay, so for our listeners, imagine this. 1977 Tenerife Airport. We've got Captain Jacob Van Zanten, right? This guy is considered a top expert in aviation safety. He's in charge of KLM Flight 4805. And then, get this, he decides to take off without clearance. Like, what?
I know, right? And it ends up being the deadliest aviation accident in history. Just tragic.
It's like, how could someone with his experience, his knowledge, make such a, well, irrational decision?
That's the big question, right? And that's where Sway comes in. They dig into this concept called loss aversion to try and explain it.
Oh, yeah. They had that example about supermarket shoppers and egg prices, remember?
Right. They were talking about this research by Daniel Putler. It found that, like, when egg prices went up, shoppers just stopped buying them. They were, like, way more sensitive to the idea of losing money than they were to the idea of saving money when the prices were lower.
It's funny how we do that, right? Like, we might freak out over a few cents more for eggs. But then, think about Captain Van Zanten. He was probably fixated on all the costs of a delay. Like paying for hotels for all the stranded passengers, the messed up flight schedules, the whole thing.
I can see that.
And there's this research by Professor Eric Johnson, I think, that suggests that the more we feel like we have to lose, the more likely we are to do something irrational to avoid that loss.
Yeah, it's like the fear of the loss just takes over, and we don't think straight. Sway even tells this story about a financial planner, Jordan Walters, and he had this client who refused to sell his biotech stock, even though it was, like, tanking. Have you ever been in a situation like that, where you just held on to something for way too long because you didn't want to accept the loss?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's hard to let go sometimes.
It really is. But in the case of Captain Van Zanten, there was also this other thing going on, his commitment to his original plan.
You mean like his commitment to sticking to the schedule?
Exactly. He didn't want to deviate from the plan, even when things were clearly going wrong. And Sway makes this really cool comparison to Steve Spurrier, that football coach for the University of Florida. He totally changed the game with his fun and gun offense.
Yeah, while everyone else was stuck in that old play not to lose mindset.
Exactly. And Spurrier's success really showed how sometimes being too committed to a plan, even if it's not working, can be a recipe for disaster.
So are you saying that Van Zanten's commitment to avoiding that delay, combined with his fear of all those potential losses, is what led him to make that fateful decision?
I think so, yeah. It's like it all just snowballed. This intense aversion to loss, plus this unwavering commitment, created this perfect storm of irrationality. And it just goes to show, even the most experienced people aren't immune to these powerful psychological forces.
It's a scary thought, isn't it? That these same forces are probably at work in our own lives all the time, and we might not even realize it. Makes you wonder, right? Like, are we all just walking around making these irrational decisions all the time?
Well, yeah, kind of. I mean, it's human nature, right? But there's this other example in Sway that I think really gets at how powerful these biases can be. They talk about LBJ in the Vietnam War.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It seemed like a strange comparison at first, but it really makes you think.
It's a really good analogy. They compare LBJ's his gradual escalation in Vietnam to this thing called the $20 bill auction. Have you ever heard of that?
No, not really.
Okay, so it's this thing that this professor, Max Bazerman, I think, he uses this option at Harvard Business School to show how people get, like, sucked into this cycle of loss aversion and commitment. And it leads them to make decisions that just don't make any sense.
Okay, so how does this auction work?
So picture this. You got a $20 bill, right? And they're auctioning it off. Bidding starts at $1 and it goes up in dollar increments. But here's the catch. The highest bidder and the second highest bidder have to pay their final bid. but only the highest bidder actually gets the $20.
Wait, so you could end up paying like $15 and not even get the $20.
Exactly. And that's the point. People get so focused on winning and on not losing the money they've already bid that they end up bidding way more than $20. Like some people end up paying $25, $30, even more just to win a $20 bill.
Wow, that's crazy. It's like they get so caught up in the fear of losing that they forget about the bigger picture.
And that's exactly what happened to LBJ with Vietnam. He kept getting deeper and deeper involved, increasing U.S. involvement little by little, even though it was becoming clear that they couldn't win.
It's interesting that you mentioned the whole idea of like incremental escalation, because Sway also talks about how optimism plays into this too. They talk about how both LBJ and later George W. Bush used this very optimistic language about Vietnam and Iraq, even when like the facts on the ground were saying something totally different.
Right. It's like they were clinging to this hope, convincing themselves that victory was just around the corner, even when it was obvious that it wasn't going to happen. Like I remember reading this quote from Daniel Kahneman, that Nobel Prize winner. He said, "To withdraw now is to accept a sure loss. That option is deeply unattractive." And I think that's what LBJ was struggling with.
Yeah, so he was basically caught in this psychological auction, right? Driven by the fear of admitting defeat and this like desperate hope that things would magically turn around.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And it's not just presidents who do this. Think about how often we get stuck in these situations in our own lives. Have you ever like poured more and more time or money into something that just wasn't working just because you couldn't bring yourself to quit?
Yeah, definitely. It's like that sunk cost fallacy thing, right? Where you feel like you have to keep going because you've already invested so much.
Exactly. It's tough, man. It's a powerful force. But I think the good news is that by understanding these forces, we can start to recognize them in our own lives and maybe make some, better choices, more conscious choices, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway here. Okay, so let's move on to something else that really caught my eye in Sway. This whole idea of value attribution. They start off by talking about this guy, Eugene Dubois, and his discovery of Homo erectus back in 1891.
Oh, yeah, Dubois. His story is like a classic example of how we judge things based on like where they came from or how they're presented rather than on their actual merit.
Yeah, like he made this huge discovery that really pushed our understanding of human evolution, but people just dismissed it because it didn't fit with their ideas of what the missing link was supposed to look like.
It's wild, right? And then you compare that to the Piltdown Man hoax, which was totally fake, but people loved it because it fit with their biases and it was, British.
It's kind of scary how easily we could be influenced by these, like, arbitrary perceptions of value.
It really is. And Sway has this great example, the Joshua Bell experiment. Remember that? This world-famous violinist played incognito in a subway station in D.C.
Oh, yeah, and most people just walked right by him.
They were so used to seeing like street musicians in that context that they couldn't even recognize like world-class talent when they saw it.
It's like they were judging him based on his appearance and his surroundings, not on the quality of his music.
Exactly. They gave him a lower value just because of where he was playing. It's kind of like that story about Nathan Handwerker and his hot dogs, right? They only started selling like crazy after people saw doctors eating them.
As if the doctors somehow made the hot dogs better, right?
Yeah, it's like we automatically assign a higher value to something if it's associated with people or institutions that we see as, important or credible.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And Sway even talks about this study where they gave students the same drink, but told some it was an expensive energy drink and others that it was a discounted one. And guess what? The students who thought they were drinking the expensive drink actually did better on a test.
I know, right? It's crazy. It just shows how powerful these little cues can be in shaping our perceptions and behaviors. Makes you wonder if we ever really make decisions based on like objective information, Or are we always influenced by these biases?
That's a big question. And it's one that I think we should all be asking ourselves.
Yeah, it really does make you think.
And this whole idea of value attribution, it kind of ties into the next story from Sway. It's about the discovery of the Hobbit, Homo floresiensis, back in 2004.
Ah, yeah, the Hobbit. It's like a perfect example of how this value attribution thing, it can even mess with science, Like even scientists aren't immune to it.
So imagine, right, you got this team of researchers led by Mike Morwood, and they're digging around on this island in Indonesia, Flores. And boom, they find these skeletal remains, but they're like totally different from anything anyone's ever seen.
Yeah, they were tiny, right? Like really small. And the skull, it was like super tiny.
Exactly. It was a huge discovery, right? It could totally change how we think about, like, human evolution.
Totally. But you know what? A lot of scientists, they didn't buy it.
They didn't. Why not?
Well, Sway talks about how some scientists were so stuck in their ideas about, like, what human evolution should look like that they couldn't accept this new evidence.
So basically, they just dismissed The Hobbit because it didn't fit with their, like, preconceived notions.
Pretty much, yeah. They were like, nah, it's probably just a microcephalic human, weird case, not a new species.
And that's value attribution.
Yeah.
Right. They gave it less value because it didn't fit their existing beliefs.
Exactly. But then you got this Dr. Dean Falk. She's a forensic anthropologist, and she decides to make this really detailed cast of the Hobbit skull.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about her. Her findings were, like, super interesting.
They were. She found that the Hobbit's brain, it was actually more advanced than anyone thought, especially in the areas that control, like, planning and thinking, which totally contradicted that whole microcephaly thing.
So she had the evidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
But did people believe her?
It's crazy, but even with that evidence, some scientists still push back. It's like they were saying, we've already decided what this is, and we're not changing our minds. It's kind of sad, right? Like, even in science, sometimes people just don't want to accept new ideas. It's like they're afraid of being wrong or of having to change their whole worldview.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, how much of what we believe is actually based on, like, real evidence and how much is just, like, our own biases and assumptions.
I know, it's a lot to think about. And it makes you realize, like, how important it is to be open to new ideas, even if they challenge what you already believe.
Totally. Well, I think this has been a really fascinating deep dive into irrational behavior. It's definitely made me think about my own choices and, how these hidden forces might be influencing me.
Yeah, me too. And the cool thing is that just by being aware of these biases, we can start to, like, counteract them a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. So to all our listeners out there, think about the things we've talked about today. Think about loss aversion, commitment, value attribution,
Right.
and how they might be playing a role in your own lives.
And remember, sway is just the starting point. There's
Yeah.
so much more to learn about human behavior, and it's all super fascinating.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.